This is showing the process of painting wet in wet using black acrylic ink. What I'm doing here is filling in the area of the horse with water, with lots of water. I'm using some water that has already had ink in it because it helps me see where the water is. As you can see from this footage, it's hard to tell where the water is except for where the light hits it. So by using some previously muddied inky water, it just puts a little bit of gray on there, which is really helpful. And now I am going in with pure black acrylic ink to kind of fill in that shape. And in some areas like these hooves, the water is sort of so bubbled up. There's so much water on it, perhaps too much, that the ink kind of floats around. So I'm just helping it out with the tip of the brush. And this was a really interesting illustration because I've never really tried to paint something so specific or so non-abstract in this method. I've done portions of images, or I don't know, I've done a lot of experimenting with wet in wet using this acrylic ink, but I haven't done anything that has to kind of tell a visual story at the end. This is an illustration that I was working on for a poster for a bar that some friends of mine own. It's a bar that has had a Kentucky Derby party for many, many, many years. In fact, the Derby party in question began at a different bar, at several different bars, before it came to live at this particular bar. Same people involved. But anyway, I had to do an illustration of a racehorse. And before I began this particular one with the wet in wet technique, I tried a few different drawings and tried painting them in as if I were using watercolor. And the acrylic ink it just wasn't working so well. And also I was just being very timid. And I had a deadline and time was running out. So I decided to chuck the methods that were sort of more tame and trying to do layers and trying to start with the lightest colors and build up. And I decided to do something more bold and try to get something that was a bit more, free, a bit more abstract feeling, the way that my ink paintings are. So what we have here is a piece of quite nice cold press watercolor paper. And what I did for this process was trace the drawing in quite light lines. I didn't do an original drawing on this paper because there would be tons of erasure and it would, end up affecting the sizing on the surface of the paper. So I just traced the drawing onto this clean, pristine piece of cold pressed paper. Just enough to give me some ideas of where the shapes are and, so I wouldn't be flying blind, so to speak. So this was a quite experimental piece, and I just love seeing how when you hit those areas of water with the pure ink, how it moves. Here you can see I'm using a very fine pen. This is a rigger. And this one is a catalyst brush. I really like working with those brushes for certain things because they have a lot of snap. They're not soft, so it holds its shape really nicely. So it's working really well to draw these lines for the tail. I was using regular watercolor round brushes prior to this when I was touching the ink into areas of water that I wanted to be quite dark. And this is going at pretty well. I think this might be at almost actual speed. Maybe it's about 80% or 75%, so it's a little bit sped up, but not very much. Most of this work where I'm working into the wet is real time, or close. I can't remember. But for contrast, the section at the beginning of this video where I was just filling in the horse's body with slightly gray water, that was at like 1% of speed. It was super, super sped up. So here I'm using that same rigger brush, which is traditionally used for painting the rigging on ships. I'm using that to do some fine lines, do some details as the water begins to dry. You can see I went back and added the horse's eye for a second time. I have done paintings for something like this where I've used liquid frisket to mask out the areas that I don't want to get covered with ink. But I find that because of the thickness of the liquid frisket, it causes the very wet media to kind of well up a little bit away from the edges that you mask off. And that's not so great. It can be very effective at times, but when I have used it in that way, I wasn't super pleased. So for this one, I'm just doing it all freestyle. The only thing that was holding the ink in place was where I had put the water. Now I'm doing some painting on the jockey, and it is not at all wet on wet. I'm going straight in with a wash, combining the ink and some water. And again, using that fine, very snappy catalyst brush, which I really like. Catalyst brushes are great too because you can totally use those with anything. You can use them with watercolor, you can use them with acrylic. Pretty sure you can use them with oil. They are synthetic and they're workhorses. They last a long time. They don't get frayed. I have quite a few of those. I have brights, I have flats. I have some filberts by Catalyst. I really like them. They're not perfect for everything, but they're quite nice for control. Just filling in this jockey's pants and his silks. He has on some gloves. They're leather gloves, so I'm trying to darken those up. As you'll see when this is finished, I think it works out that the jockey and his regalia is pretty pale because it allows the horse to kind of take center stage. But I wish that I had been a little bit bolder. You can see there I was doing a bit of wet on wet to get some gradation on his silks, but still being real I don't know, not really taking any chances there. I was working with such watered down ink. Now coming back in with the black to do the horse's bridle and his tack. Some of his mane. His mane is blowing in the wind as he runs so fast, his martingale, and the girth. I guess that was a little bit of a shadow from underneath the saddle. You can see all this time while I've been doing all this sort of noodly detail, our horse has been drying. So that also gives you an idea of how sped up this part is. Earlier I was working slowly, or rather I was playing it at almost full speed while the horse was really wet. But as I started doing these less interesting details where the ink is not moving, this is really fast. This is like, I don't know, 2% of actual speed. It's super sped up. You can really tell in this section. I watched it ahead of time. I watched it while I was editing, and it was super boring. So I speed these parts up for you. But yeah, I was getting a little bit out of frame, but the way that the ink dried in the pure water of the horse to me is so fascinating. Oh, all right. Well, I guess we were finished, or mostly finished. Here I am showing you a couple of my warm-ups, and there is the finished Racehorse. And this is what our Derby boy looks like on the poster that I was designing it for. As a bonus, I'm also showing you some very, very sped up footage of some of my warm-ups. This one I finally decided I need to draw some of this stuff. The first one, I was just trying to do it completely freehand with water and ink, and yeah. Good warm-up, not a good final. Same with this.